we were all set to hate AI moderation. And we were sort of dumbfounded that it hit about 80 or 85% of what we found as very seasoned researchers and think we're okay at this. And so we were like, wow, we at least have to take this seriously.
Welcome to Insights Unlocked, an original podcast from User Testing, where we bring you candid conversations and stories with the thinkers, doers, and builders behind some of the most successful digital products and experiences in the world, from concept to execution.
Welcome to the Insights Unlocked podcast. I'm Nathan Isaacs, Principal Content Marketing Manager at User Testing. And joining us today's host is User Testing's Lija Hogan, Principal for Experience Research Strategy. Welcome to the show, Lija.
Thank you, Nathan.
And our guest today is John Whalen. He leads Insights and Innovation at Brilliant Experience, where he and his team have reimagined their research approach by deeply integrating AI into their processes. He teaches the Maven Top 100 course, AI for Customer Research, and hosts the podcast AI for UX, where he interviews founders of AI-powered research tools. John Whalen is a cognitive scientist and author of Design for How People Think. Welcome to the show, John.
Wow, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I am thrilled to be joining you for this conversation today, John, because I think given your long history in customer research, user experience research, and now weaving in artificial intelligence, you have a lot of wisdom to share. And I think it'll be helpful for our listeners to hear more about that perspective. But as we get started, could you just spend a little bit of time talking about the beginnings of your career in this space and kind of what attracted you to the discipline and what about it has kept you so passionate about it?
Yeah, so I won't belabor it too much because it was in the land when dinosaurs still roamed the earth. But I did a postdoc at UCLA when some of the dot-com boom was going. I saw things like Netscape Navigator 3.1 and saw how clunky it was. And I was like, gosh, why can't we put more psychology into this to make it more human friendly? And I sort of had a love for technology, and I found that I could do, as a research professor, you've got to be an expert in one thing and study it. And I found that in consulting, I could have a new thing I do and make a contribution like every 2 months or every 3 months. And that was awesome. And so being able to merge my fun of learning new things and technology and trying to relate that back to our humane existence, really, I find it like endlessly curious to see how people are thinking and how can we align what we're doing with how people think. That's why I literally wrote a book called Design for How People Think.
I love it. I think it's really that history really informs where it is that we are today. And I think the work that you're doing specifically around artificial intelligence and across the space in that new area is really fascinating because obviously there's a lot of hot takes on it, as we said earlier as we were preparing for this call, across the spectrum. And I think I'd like to start with the question around where, if at all, and I'm assuming yes, you think at this time AI could help to support the quality or accelerate what it is that we do as researchers? And is there anything that should be off limits?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's true that I've sort of deeply integrated AI into our processes at Brilliant Experience. But we did that carefully. So just to take a quick step back, I saw a podcast about 2 Halloweens, now almost 2 years ago exactly, with a group that said, yes, we're doing synthetic ideators that are talking to synthetic users and cycling through that. And then we're interviewing 300 people over a weekend over 6 languages. And I was just like, what is this stuff? Is it any good? Like, should we trust it? Like, I must be behind the times if it's any good. So So what I did is actually, we did two things actually. So I'm one of the, experimental psychologists here. So we put our money where our mouth is. And first I started interviewing people who are founders of some of these tools. We met them, we tried the tools. We're just literally, experimenting and learning prompting, things like that. We also did what we called our AI versus human researcher sort of head-to-head contest. And really what we did is so I did the good old 2022 version of a human interviewing humans and do all the analysis and report it. We had a second person, another PhD psychologist, do the same sort of thing, human to human, interviews and analyze it. And the third that really matters here is have an AI moderator and otherwise, one of those people did the analysis and so on. Okay, so the moral of the story is we white labeled those, sent them to fellow senior researchers. And the key point is that we were all set to hate AI moderation. And we were sort of dumbfounded that it hit about 80 or 85% of what we found as very seasoned researchers and think we're okay at this. And so we were like, wow, we at least have to take this seriously. And so we started to look at all the different tools and really did a head-to-head comparison of timing and so on. So let me say it this way, that for sure, I think lots of people would love to agree with me that right now, any of these tools are not as good as humans who have the time and can really dig in. But I also think that there are opportunities for example, take AI moderation. I just can't do 100 interviews in 3 days. And with this kind of tool, I can. And so remember, if I go back to my sort of 80-85% idea, well, I'm getting something rather than nothing. If a stakeholder has a major decision in a few days, maybe having some insights rather than just the stakeholder's best guess is better than zero. And in other cases, my Finnish and Thai and Brazilian Portuguese aren't what they should be. And so this allows me to be more have more inclusion and bring in more things where that would have been time and cost prohibitive otherwise. So I think there are opportunities to expand what we're doing and provide folks more than we did before. So I'm not ready to replace humans, but I think in some cases there are ways to really empower us to do more than we would have otherwise.
Yeah, I think, what I take away from that is really augmentation, acceleration, additional speed, doesn't necessarily have to be precision. But the other side of that is when you've got something that's high risk, where you've got the resources and time,
absolutely,
there should be more investment there.
Right. So exactly right. So when it's the big $300 million decision, I don't want you to pull out your favorite AI moderator and just get its default results and do something. Absolutely not. I might use some of those tools for making sure I'm doing like a global study in that case to augment what I'm doing again. We also, when we started to use these things, we did get folks who were native to the geography we were talking about to look at transcriptions, to look at play the videos, see what sort of nuance they're missing. So I'm Canadian, so I might start talking about Chesterfields and toques, and people are like, what are you talking about? And so, there could be these sort of, or idioms, like the pot calling the kettle black, and wanted to see how it did. And we just keep just remember, even now, these things, I don't mean to be a fanboy, but logically you can say to yourself, these are the worst they'll ever be, and they seem somewhat useful now. And so think about ChatGPT maybe 2 years ago and what ChatGPT is now. So think about what these tools could be 2 years from now. So we're looking at these seriously, not only to use them in our practice today, but to be prepared for tomorrow.
Yeah, that's, I think, a really good point to shift gears a little bit and talk about a specific use case that I think a lot of people have strong feelings about, which is synthetic users.
Sure.
And I know that you've done a lot of work in this space too, and would love to know more about what made you decide that synthetic users were worth taking seriously.
Yeah. So the first thing to say is I had the exact same reaction many researchers have when I first heard about synthetic users, guffaw, like that's ridiculous. And then later I was like, okay, we're researchers. We should actually take a more measured approach and test these things, contrast it with real human data, understand what its strengths and weaknesses are, just to make an informed decision. And that doesn't mean ever use them at all, but simply to make an informed decision like we should. We should be guiding our stakeholders with, the knowledge and power of all the resources we have and know when to use them or when to never use them. So I think a simple thing we've done, Leah, I'm teaching a course called AI for Customer Research, and every cohort since February, we've actually been reaching out to real humans, doing interviews with them, then analyzing that data. And so we've got that analysis. We know what the major findings were. In this case, we tend to do something very easy to recruit friends and family. So our example was, how are you using AI in everyday life? And kind of what are your pain points? What could be an ideal version of that? Okay, so then what we do is we take 3 different methods. So either just prompting and creating a synthetic user that's representative of that population, or there's syntheticusers.com. There's also, we've been using a tool by a group called Verve, like video survey, verve.com. And so for each of those other 2, we gave it the same questions that we gave our real humans. And specifically, let's take the example of what would compose your ideal AI assistant? What would its features or capabilities be? And the moral of the story is, in like cohort after cohort after cohort, I think we've got 9 now, where there's maybe 7 major points, those things are getting 6 or 7 right, and not having 3 extra ones no one heard of. So I guess my point is that it's close enough that I think it's worth taking seriously. And for a couple reasons. One is that might not be our major decision-making process, but maybe these things, not for that $300 million thing we're talking about, but there's a designer that wants to make a quick decision and just needs a little insight into his or her target audience. Or a product owner is like, oh, I wonder if they'd like this kind of model of interacting with us, something maybe smaller. And these things would just be that person's best guess. And maybe this is a way to inform that. So the way I think of synthetic user data is not that it's actually data or facts. I think of it as inspiration, or a way to broaden my thinking, and a way to prepare for being with the real users. Real humans, I should say. I'll just be really clear, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really kind of profound thing to think about, because I think it's one of those moments where you really come to grips with the idea that human time is very valuable, like that direct contact, and how do we enrich that preparation so that when we get to that moment, we're not wasting it, like it's really right. A great moment.
So the synthetic user group actually has a very measured, so just know that they sometimes have bold statements, but they also are very measured, actually. So they're saying, hey, we can do this initial study with synthetic users to really prepare or to be. So think of actually a normal research study back in 2022. I would do 2 or 3 interviews, and then we'd talk to our stakeholders, say, what should we change about our interview guide? What have we learned about the basics of these people? And we kind of feel like we're getting there already using synthetic users. And just know that they don't have to just answer your questions, right? So this is a new tool. It's just a tool, right? We kind of give it this humane property. But if we just act like it's a hammer or a printer and say it's just another tool, maybe that, there are lots of things this could do, right? It could help us. So when we think of a set of questions we might have for an interview, we run through those with a synthetic user, and that can do a couple things. One is it could give us an answer we never expected, and maybe that's because our question actually didn't really hit the mark. And maybe it's because there's some answers that we aren't really expecting, and we can be more prepared for them if we get them from real humans. And I think another thing we can do is we can ask what I like to call sort of impossible questions I could never ask of a real human. So things like, which of my questions, offended you the most, or which one put you off guard? What's the question I never asked you that I should have? What would I want to know, but you would never tell me in an interview, right? So I'm not sure these are exactly what the real humans would say, but it's, again, fills my mental model with possibilities to be ready for. So I think it's actually, so I guess I'm saying this is a more utility player of a tool than just asking it the normal questions. The other thing is you can ask it, what do you think of this concept? Or how would you normally do this? And by the way, respond in jobs to be done format. And my normal humans that I interview aren't very good at that. And so, it's just a way to think of things very differently. Lastly, and probably most frightening to our viewers is so here's an irony. These things are synthetic users, and yet many of our clients have asked for a report of what research we've done, but also a synthetic user or a set of them that embody the research we found, so that it sort of stays and sort of comes to life. And so, well, what are they going to say? I'm not sure exactly, but I know, the framework here. And so we prepare stakeholders for that. But interestingly, it excites the stakeholders about doing research. It says, oh, I found this really interesting thing with this synthetic user. And because we've told them, of course, don't trust that for your $300 million question, they're coming back to us to do. So I guess I'm getting them excited about getting primary research. So ironically, I have to use a synthetic user to do it, but it's a tool to, draw everyone into the humane nature that we really want in the end.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's almost ironic sometimes that you have to think about thinking, getting people interested by not using necessarily a human to say like this really valuable moment, however, is something that can be brought to you by the same people who created an artificial moment.
Right.
Yeah. So this is interesting. At User Testing, we're very focused on getting insights to drive better business outcomes and also outcomes for customers, right? That's the core of what it is that we do as UX and CX researchers. You talked a little bit about some specific examples around how you might use synthetic users in certain contexts. But when you're looking out and across the entire process as we think about it, what are some specific places where you see specifically synthetic users contributing to, again, that acceleration, augmentation, quality? Yeah.
Let me give you an example. And this is another way to think of this as a tool and not, something that's going to get you out of a job. So when we start with stakeholders and have sort of a stakeholder workshop to get us started on what are our research priorities and try and coalesce on those, many times some stakeholders will say, hey, we really want to answer this question with this set of people. And so literally in the workshop, what we can do is we can spin up a synthetic user that's, somewhat representative of that, sort of fast and dirty, and then ask a question that corresponds to, maybe that's a strategic question. We, change it a little bit to be a reasonable question to someone and get a response. And generally what often happens in that sort of circumstance is that they say, No, that's not exactly what I was after. I was after this instead. And, maybe that's not the right kind of person for these reasons. And so just then we've already captured a little more nuance into what really is the question that stakeholder has, and to know a little bit more about how better to target our audience. So it's simply a tool in that case. It almost doesn't matter what came out of the synthetic user. So I guess I'm saying that from earliest days to final reporting, there can be an interesting use for these tools. So we also test so we mentioned just kickoff essentially, preparing interview questions. When we're doing recruiting, we know the target audience we want. So we get our synthetic users to answer the questions to the screener to see would we have accidentally, knocked out our target audience because they would think of that question in a different way than I did. And did I just make a mistake in the way I was trying to recruit? So there are ways that there are sort of checks and balances of just another way of thinking, a fresh set of eyes kind of thing. And note that we've been talking about synthetic users, and it could be a synthetic expert, right? So we can have, for example, my specialty is psychology. I really love understanding how people think, but I wouldn't call myself a brand strategist out of the box. So having, for example, a set of interviews and getting the synthetic expert to look at those interviews from a different perspective. I might be able to do things like accessibility or usability or a strategic question, but there might be these other, say, branding questions or a marketing nuance that I might not see that maybe another vantage point might. And so especially when you're like a user research team of one, it's actually kind of nice to have some sort of partner, even if you're like, no, I don't think that's right. That helps you to solidify what you're thinking yourself. So it's not replacing my brain, but it's giving me a new avenue to challenge or to think about for myself.
That's interesting to think about because, I've been seeing other folks who are experimenting with artificial intelligence as UX researchers, thinking about what are specific agents that they could build to support their process at different stages specifically, right?
Sure.
So, someone who's all about helping to scope and figure out and get over that hump of the white page syndrome, right? Mm-hmm. Versus the how do you help with that data collection piece and the quality and acceleration of that process, and then the synthesis process separately. And so I think your framing of synthetic user versus an expert versus, whoever it is.
Yeah.
And actually, I think you're just talking about those two things, but like how those have different roles at different stages. Yeah.
Actually, let me give you one more. So when we're doing a big presentation for a big senior executive, we'll often spin up a synthetic user, even we know with our LinkedIn profile and stuff, right? So we could build that synthetic user, say we're going to present in this way. What are the first questions this person's going to ask? Or from their perspective, what have we failed to adequately account for? Or, what nuance are we missing from their perspective? And there's been a couple times that the anticipated questions are, one of those comes out of their mouth. And so again, even if it's just helping us to coach us almost, that's not changing the results. That's not, that's still us. But I think it's a way to, I don't know, just it's a new angle we can take to make sure we're thinking from every perspective.
Wow. That's really fascinating. And I think kind of plays well to the next question I have, which is really around, there's an implied sense of trust and confidence that you have in what you're getting from these agents across the process. And a lot of critics, and I'll say this, like sometimes myself included, would
Sure.
say, are we giving people or giving these synthetic agents too much credence here? Like, what are some of the things that we can do to help check that level of confidence, right? Or perhaps like maybe safeguards, guardrails that can help us to avoid that trap of overly trusting some of these agents.
Yeah, so let's take AI that provide like specialized tools or even a prompting that does analysis. Okay, so of say interviews. Let's just give a concrete example. We really like, there are a couple tools. One of them is called Coloop, and the other one is called Quali. They're both like Coloop AI, Quali AI. And the reason why is basically what it does is it tries to frame, here are your major questions, and here's each individual. Here's what we believe is sort of a terse summary of what we got for that question for that person. And then it sort of summarizes for everyone, here's what we think we're hearing. And so let me tell you why that's really good and why and what the weaknesses are inherent in that. So we're thinking from both perspectives. And by the way, I really like your perspective. I tell all my students, be curious, like be open to at least testing these things, but skeptical. So it's totally, that's the way we're researchers. We should do that. So in this case, things like, and there are other tools like this, but these ones sort of embody this idea. Every one of those points it makes is a hyperlink. And you can click on that and go straight to exactly where in the transcripts, there might be multiple places, it believes give evidence to that bullet point or whatever it might be. And so this is a trust but verify moment, right? So maybe this is a good way to get a quick sense of what happened. But, obviously there's more nuance to it, and it sometimes merges three things together that aren't really a conceptual point that makes sense to me. There are a couple weaknesses inherent with these things too, just to be clear. So one of them is it just does not have yet, and some people are really working on this, the strategic background that you do at your company. So if you've got these specific strategic goals, that you tried something, it didn't really work, for the first thing that people ask for very often. There's another thing that people always ask for as a need, and that's not a blue ocean, it's a red ocean. There's so many people in that play. We don't want to play in that space. We want to know what comes after that. Well, this tool, it typically will tell you, hey, here's the first thing we found. Here's the second thing we found. And to your stakeholders, get those out of the way. We need to know the new stuff. And so I guess my point is that it doesn't have a strategic mindset. Sometimes sort of the conceptual layers there aren't quite right. In most cases it is. I think it's quite good. But we really like that trust but verify. So we're clicking on every one of those links. So we don't want to take anything for granted. The other thing I'll tell you that it's missing is you're averaging together, say, 24 people. But if we looked into it, maybe there's, let's take the AI for personal use example. Maybe there are some people who are very nervous about privacy, and that's really important to them. There might be another audience that really feel there are environmental concerns about using AI and maybe want to limit their usage. Maybe there's someone else who just loves using it and can't wait to dive in. So those three sets of people, even if there's, 8 and 8 and 8, we've then successfully averaged all those different thinking patterns into one summary, right? So another thing we have to do is really understand what segments are there. We have to do the homework as humans, then pull them out, then reanalyze with those segments, right? So there's just a couple things. One is bring things together, can often be good, but isn't always. The other is it doesn't have that strategic mindset. And the third is it's sort of bringing people together that maybe it's not appropriate to average because of the way they're thinking.
Yeah, and that's a really, I think, important point, that disaggregation piece, especially because it leads me back to the point that fundamentally you have to be able to structure really good studies, from the ground up, so that you're creating a set of data that's really robust and that is truly representative, because that quality has to be there for there to be an LLM to actually have something to work with, right? Yeah. Right.
And so think of that representative idea for a moment. So I had a stakeholder once, I guess an engineer who will remain nameless, who was like, oh, John, it's so sweet that you interviewed 24 people and found that. We have 700 million active users in this. I don't care what 24 people said. And so in good old human land in 2022, we couldn't really do that much more with budget and time and everything. And so for that group, we were able to do several hundred interviews, globally in different languages, come back to that person and say, here's what we've got now. And there was more willingness to back the data because of that perspective. And so I do want to say that when we think about representativeness, we want to be great at asking questions, absolutely. But there is this notion of what are we missing because we're doing a scale maybe for these major global corporations that we might not be doing it entirely justice without using some of the scale that we have. So the things I guess I'm thinking of, we can go much faster. I'm on the East Coast of the US. It's not that much fun to interview people in New Zealand from here. And so having people be able to do it whenever they they like is another benefit, multilingual kind of things, and just scaling up in ways we haven't before. So there are new ways to approach research, right? The other is logically, it doesn't have to be the study. I remember working for a government client and they're like, yes, we get one study this quarter. We better do every question we can think of. Well, with this kind of tool, it allows us to do, say, 15-minute studies, with maybe 3 in a week. And we're doing sort of incremental learning as we go along. So I'm just saying, you've got new arrows in your quiver and new tools in your toolkit. We can take the analogy you want, that we can use as researchers. So it sort of empowers us to think a little differently and go back to first principles. What do people really need, as opposed to what are we used to doing?
Wow, that's that's a very thoughtful response, and I think getting people to really get back to there's some basic things that we may need to evolve a bit. It's revisit, evolve with this new tool and new possibilities. That's fascinating. So I guess, to me, that means you absolutely have to continue to do human-to-human interviews, right? Because they help to expand your thinking
Sure.
in a variety of different ways. But can you just talk a little bit more about why we need to still continue to do that human-to-human interview? Like, what's the additional benefit that we get from that? I'm assuming I'm all in, right? I'm always all in on human-to-human.
Right. So,
yeah.
Sure. So, and so you think of okay, I'm going to go back all the way back to 2022 again. We think of mixed methods as, maybe I'll do some qualitative interviews and then I'm going to scale up a survey and then we're going to find some interesting things in the survey we want to dig into and then we want to do qualitative again. Well, now I'm going to give you a twist on that. So we might do a handful of, and I'll just say human-to-human interviews just to be sparkling clear, and then be able to use, say, AI moderation to scale up our work. And remember that we can now, this notion of qual versus quant, like if I'm doing 200 interviews where we're getting qualitative data in addition to quantitative data, I mean, there's this horrible neologism, qualivate, but you know what I mean? We're sort of, maybe those distinctions aren't as black and white as they used to be. But then after doing that scaled up work, probably we're finding something interesting that the AI interviews maybe didn't do justice in following up on, and so we might do some human-to-human ones again. So there's that method that's something we do actually fairly often. So I think that was one piece that I did want to mention. Sorry, there's one other thing around my brain, but I'll get there.
We'll get there, I'm sure.
There's an idea for it.
That's really fascinating because usually when we think mixed methods research, it includes only human-to-human interactions. Right. And then, by expanding the scale that we can get to by using... It looks like you just had that moment.
Sorry. If you don't mind, I'll leap in before it goes away again. So let me give you a radical... Okay, so we're going to think a few years from now. So I guess my theory is it's 2025 right now, so maybe like 2028. Maybe this is the way the world will be. So remember, synthetic users, I do want people to take them seriously for one other reason. They're super inexpensive, right? So everyone has access to them, even today. You can do it through prompting. It's really low risk. If we tell someone, hey, we're thinking about doing this product to a synthetic user, and it's like, that's the stupidest idea I ever heard, it's okay, right? So it's not we're not hurting anyone, we're just testing ideas. So it's fast, it's risk-free, we can do these interesting things that are sort of out of the box, like, what's the better idea, or what does this really make you think of, all these impossible questions. Okay. So my argument would be that the average engineer, product person, marketer, designer will have at their disposal these synthetic users to do a quick one-off test on, right? So the highest number of hits on a research tool in 2028, I'm going to anticipate, you heard it here first, will be synthetic users. The second thing is because we've got these really interesting data repository tools that have AI powers, we can do so much better at asking questions of our past data to see what's on the cutting room floor, where maybe we might not have to do as much one-off research. Okay, so logically, first they're trying things first with synthetic users because fast, cheap, inspirational. We'll just leave it at that. We would next turn to asking questions of our, because we can ask questions now, not just like search through videos of our 500, 1,000 interviews that we've got in the can and all of our surveys. And then the third thing we'll do is new one-off research. So we might argue that there will be fewer one-off research things, but there might be, to your point, regular research that's like what's new in. So for example, let me give you what the synthetic user groups do now. So Verve is one example that comes to mind. So they do about, I think they say on their website, about 3 million interviews a year around the world with all sorts of different people, B2B and B2C and so on, and old and young. And but my point is that you might wind up having sort of baseline collection that you're doing constantly. So it'd be a little bit more of a continuous thing than doing our sort of, we need to do a new study on this because we don't know the answer. So I just think there will be this synthetic user try, corpus of what we already know try, and then go to that. So logically, there may just be less one-off and a little more continuous knowledge.
That's really fascinating. And I see, it's super fascinating to me because it implies that there's, just because the world is evolving, there's always going to be a need for basic research. And instead of saying like, hey, we need to dig into this one specific thing, the fishing expedition is now always in scope because you're designing for novelty in that in that research strategy.
Yeah, for sure. The innovation groups, the brand new new field kind of folks are going to be doing research because you don't have that. But if you're always got your SaaS product users, then you might really be regularly polling them. The other thing to let you know is there are new tools. So, and I'm sorry, I might give you a bit of toolitis because I've interviewed about 40 people now for my podcast. There's another one called Next, which is representative of a class of these sort of ones that are really focused on the whole customer experience. And it's designed, so this is when we're going to talk about agentic AI. So it brings in, for example, everything from your app store reviews to like customer service calls, to social listening, to the interviews you do, to survey data. And the idea, so imagine a group like Bosch. So they've got like dishwashers and microwaves, and I don't know what else they have. And so logically, the group that is doing marketing wants a certain kind of information. The phone group want a certain kind of information. Maybe the toaster people want to hear from the customer service calls and the social listening and the things you do. And so they essentially, the tool allows you to create sort of little researchers. Now I picture these little researchers running everywhere in the data. But anyway, the key point is that they're logging things and categorizing them constantly to like, hey, this is a pain point. This is a new request. This is something else. And this has to do with toasters. This has to do with microwaves. And this has to do with branding. And so you can see that you can start to create a dashboard from all this stuff so that us researchers won't be limited to here's the set of interviews we've done this year and last year. And instead, you've got a much broader corpus of stuff to work with. And logically, the product team would have access to that too. So just it's a new, my heart sort of beats a little faster thinking about this too. It's a new world and a little scary. Well, just lastly, I'll say that I show an emotion wheel as the first thing I do in my AI for Customer Research class and say, how are you feeling about this? And almost everyone is saying, I'm like excited and terrified. Like there's this like mixed emotion feeling, overwhelmed and uncertain, but maybe a little bit excited, So it's fair. And I've gone through all the stages of grief. Should I still have a consulting company, everything else? And it's a real transition for us, not just in the way we work, but just how we represent who we are as people, as researchers.
That, I think, is a great note to end the conversation on, because it's hopeful. Really, you still have a consulting company, and I think that you've highlighted some ideas for people to continue to bring meaning and connection to other people through research work. So that's wonderful.
Well, just a last note, I really encourage folks to keep learning prompt engineering. It really is valuable. They call it context engineering too, but that whole side of the world is really valuable for us researchers. Learn and try these AI moderated interview tools, learn these AI powered analysis tools, and learn synthetic users. So I'm not saying you have to bring them all in. I'm saying you have to have an educated opinion on these things and understand what works and what doesn't. And then think to the future of, suppose these got really good, what would I do then? And so be prepared for the future and evolve the way we need to.
Yeah. That's such a great point. Like, all of those things are, I think, relatively low risk strategies that you can use today to kind of prepare for the world that's coming. Awesome. So, before we close out, I'd love for you to share, how do people learn more about what it is that you're doing, where it is that you're going, what it is you're thinking?
Yeah, I think you can just Google John Whalen and you'll get a bunch of stuff, for better or for worse. So I have a podcast called AI for UX that's on Brilliant Experience is my company. So if you just go to YouTube and type in Brilliant Experience, you'll get there. So those founders of tools say, who is this tool for? They give a demo of the tool, so you might not be able to get access to it typically, and then say, where do they think the future of research is going? Because they are in the know. They have to try and be where the puck is going to go, not where it is now. So there's that, and I do a class on Maven called AI for Customer Research. And so there's a couple places to start, and that should be enough. And yeah, please do reach out, LinkedIn. I'd be delighted to keep in touch.
Lovely. Thank you so much for this conversation today. I have to say, even if you are, as a listener, skeptical about artificial intelligence, hopefully this gives you a little bit more insight into why you might want to challenge that notion, perception, position, whatever that is. Awesome. So thank you for joining me today, and we'll close here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.